I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. May we roll call, please?
Mayor Pereira?
Here.
Vice Mayor Watson?
Here.
Councilmember Atkins-Salazar? Councilmember Schaefer?
Here.
Councilmember Goldstein?
Here.
All present.
Great, thank you. Next on our agenda, we have early oral communications. This 15-minute time period is provided for people to address the council on matters not on tonight's agenda. At the conclusion of all oral communications, the council may respond to this. Any request that requires council action will be set by the council for a future agenda or referred to staff. Speakers addressing the council at this time are limited to 2 minutes, and we can take up to 7 speakers. Please raise your hand if you are on Zoom, or press *9 if you are calling in by phone and wish to comment. Do we have any members of the public that would like to speak for early oral communications for an item that's not on tonight's agenda?
So a reminder, this is for items that are not on tonight's agenda. We will have an opportunity later in the meeting for that. And we do, at least initially, have 3 hands raised. And our first one is Sean Armstrong, please. Go ahead, Sean.
Thank you very much. Council members, I'm Sean Armstrong of Tulip Fog Farm and a local business, Redwood Energy. I'm a resident of 26 years, I've chaired a city committee twice. Regarding the Creekside Homes annexation, I'm asking you to please send a letter to LAFCO clarifying that the council does not wish to have its boundary expanded over our farmland. For your consideration, I have 6 related questions. 1, new council members, had you known that a 51-acre annexation of farmland proposed against the wishes of the farmers, would you have run on the issue? If you had known that city staff was also proposing a new general plan at the same time, which hasn't been considered by council, this request for it, which is the opportunity for developers to rezone farmland, what stand would you have taken on the annexation of our farmland? Continuing council members, how do you respond to your staff with Plan West in their acting capacity as LAFCO staff, proposing in April of 2020 to triple the size of the annexation that you approved in February 5th of 2020, just 2 months earlier? Now, question 4. A new EIR was circulated in the county without informing the applicant, Danco, or the landowners, and was not brought to your council. Is that how you intended your staff to operate? 5. My understanding from my partner, Michael Winkler, my business partner, is that in 2020, city staff did not inform him his role as mayor or the city council that the community development department had decided to discard the previous general plan that we're operating under right now, and was planning the start of a new one during his tenure as mayor and without direction from council, which he found is a non-standard process. Was another council member consulted without his knowledge? And 6, if a new general plan with our annexed land, is that the actual considered wish of this council? Thank you.
Thank you. Our next raised hand is, it's a phone caller. I don't know if you have a screen name, but it's call-in user 3. And you.
Hello, this is Kent Sawatsky. I think I've been unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Kent. Please go ahead.
So the last speaker, I strongly support what he just said. Think about what he said. This is very important. For those of you who know me or don't know me, I just threw out some envelopes today, and the envelopes were to address to Mr. Brown, I believe it was, which was our current governor, and Camille Harris, which is our current vice president. And these letters that I had in these big envelopes didn't need to be used. So I just want to let you know who I am and what I do. The letters were regarding basically what cost the city, I think, $6 million, and you can check with your staff. So I kind of talked to the city a little bit and try to help you not to have those $6 million things come back and bite you later. I'm self-proclaimed autistic. Don't know if you've dealt with this before. We reverse engineer things, and this is before any of you were on this commission. So I have some serious concerns with some major things that are happening within the city, and these are things that I kind of watchdog. And when I follow through on things, things happen. So I wish you to avoid certain things, and certain things I'm asking you to avoid, as far as major litigation, which could cost the city $6 million or more, or whatever in the future. So please do not do anything that basically jeopardizes the public health, safety, and welfare. So I'm talking on some of these general topics. I'll talk specifically later or not regarding a specific project that does that. It's called an attractive nuisance. And you may wish to talk to your council. And of course, I'm aware of your counsel. I've worked with her before, and I have respect for her. But let her know talk to her and when you're put on a legal notice as far as something happening. In other words, if you endanger the public health, safety, and welfare, then you actually are liable. Thank you for my opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Kent. Our next speaker has a screen name Karen Davidson. Please go ahead, Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Davidson, and I live on Tule Fog Farm. I'm speaking because the annexation of our farmland on Foster seems wrong. It doesn't seem like what you guys wanted. We object. We don't understand how this slipped through the city council's hands. I'm really disappointed that our request last week didn't get this on the agenda, because time is important. I request this be on the next meeting agenda. It's huge. We don't want to be annexed, as it makes farming harder. No roosters, no farm worker houses. It will also make development more likely on prime farm land. We fear the new general plan being developed is a way of developing farmland, and we don't understand why it's happening. Mayor Winkler wasn't consulted or notified. And finally, the notification from LAFCO was inadequate, and it wasn't well distributed. The one I saw was not well explained. It had the map in black and white, and it was illegible because the changes were shown on their maps in color, and the ones sent to our farms, if they were sent in black and white. So why did this happen? Can you help us? Will you help us? Will you send a letter to LAFCO saying none of you knew anything about this or approved of it? And if you did know about it, why have you said you didn't? Because everybody I've talked to said you had no idea. So if you could please send a letter.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Karen. We currently have 3 waiting to speak. Our next one, Shale, can you go ahead, please? You'll have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Shale Peck-Krause, and I'm the farmer owner of Tule Fog Farm. We live on the land that was just annexed. We pay our taxes. We're consistent community members, but we weren't considered or consulted at all about this annexation, which is really detrimental to our farm. The map that was sent out was completely indecipherable. You could not tell that it actually included our farm. We thought it only included the original land annex proposal. This puts our farming at risk. It means we can't have roosters, which are integral to us being able to raise our chickens without buying chicks from factory farms. We're a pig farm, and it puts our pigs at risk because pigs are considered a nuisance animal in the city. And we have tiny houses that house our farm workers. I did not get a weekend for 12 years until we were able to get tiny houses for our farm workers. And they're the only reason that I get weekend family time, any vacation time, or sick leave. So they're incredibly important to our farm. This annexation puts this land at risk for development. It pretty much guarantees this land is going to be developed someday if it's in the city without an easement on it. This is prime ag land. It should never be developed. And you all know that ag land that gets put in the city does get developed. You can just look at that at the development that just happened on Q Street. So please send a letter to LAFCO stating that you do not support the annexation amendments. It is a disaster for the current farmers and the land's future as agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have a phone caller 4. Can you go ahead, please? Phone caller 4. Can you unmute?
Hello.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Thank you. This is Joanne McGarry calling on my old-fashioned flip phone, watching the YouTube, and they're not in sync, what I'm hearing on the phone and what I'm watching on YouTube. I'm limited in my technology to be able to attend these meetings, but I really, really want to. So I just wanted to first share that if civic engagement is wanted in the community, it would be really nice if we could have a little more functional technology or whatever to be able to, participate. And so I know I watched the Human Rights Commission meeting the other day, and they seem to have it a little bit better. And maybe we can reach out to some of the different organizations that are having these Zoom meeting type things and figure out how they're doing it, and maybe it can improve, because I really feel disjointed sometimes with this current setup for the meetings. So that's one thing. The second thing is more important. I've been watching a lot of information about the climate crisis and reminding our city council and our city manager and city departments that we did declare a climate emergency or climate emergency back in September 2019. And I think it needs to be something that is considered in everything that we do in terms of city planning, whether it's the marsh, whether it's these annexations, whether it's transportation, and it's really a dire situation as we are seeing in Texas. So I just want the city of Arcata to be in the forefront of responding locally as we can to the climate emergency that we have declared. So that's what I wanted to share with you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. And our next is a phone caller, user 1. Can you go ahead, please?
Good evening, City Council. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Hi, this is Uri Driscoll. I was on the Open Space and Ag Committee for probably about 7 years. And I would really like to back up comments that Sean made and others about the annexation of prime agriculture land. I think that is just one of the most grave mistakes that we can make as a community, and we cannot be making more agriculture land. And the way it's getting gobbled up through all these different avenues, there was just 70 some acres that of prime agriculture land just on the border of Arcata that just got swallowed up and turned into I'm not sure what they turned that into, but we need to really protect our agriculture land. And when I was on that committee, these type of annexations were not something that we would approve of. It's unfortunate that that agriculture committee has disbanded because there is nothing more important than being able to grow food, and we should not be losing these prime agriculture soils. Thank you for my opportunity to speak.
Thank you. All right, any more speakers for items that are not on tonight's agenda? That looks like all of our speakers, Mayor.
Okay, well, thank you. We will move on to consent calendar. All matters on the consent calendar are considered to be the City Council and are enacted in one motion. There is no separate discussion of any of these items. If discussion is required, that item is removed from the consent calendar and considered separately. At the end of the reading of the consent calendar, council members or members of the public can request that an item be removed for separate discussion. So I'll go ahead and read through the consent calendar. Item A, approve the minutes of the City Council meeting of February 3rd, 2021. B, bi-weekly report on warrants. C, adopt resolution number 201-34, authorizing submittal of the city's application for funding under Cal Recycle's Farm and Ranch Solid Waste Cleanup and Abatement Grant to be applied to solid waste cleanup at Carlson Park. D, a memorandum of understanding between the City of Arcata and Redwood Coast Mountain Bike Association to enable RCMBA to organize volunteer work days to support the city's trails and authorize the city manager to execute all applicable documents. Item E, adopt resolution number 201-36, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Arcata authorizing the city manager to execute all master agreements, program supplemental agreements, fund exchange agreements, fund transfer agreements, and any amendments for all the City of Arcata projects with the California Department of Transportation. F, adopt urgency ordinance number 1544, an urgency ordinance of the City Council of the City of Arcata, extending ordinance number 1542, temporary restrictions on the eviction of commercial tenants due to non-payment of rent because of COVID-19, waive reading of the text and consent to read by title only. G, adopt ordinance number 1543, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Arcata, creating Article 3 in Chapter 2, Title 6 of the Municipal Code to regulate short-stay vacation rentals, waive reading of the text and consent to read by title only. And lastly, H, receive financial forecast of adopted budget for fiscal year 2020-2021. Before I ask for anything to be reviewed, I do need to note for the record that I will be recusing myself for item G on the consent calendar. Is there any member of the council that would like to pull an item for separate discussion?
I'd like to pull item G, please.
Okay. Any member, any city staff like to pull an item? Okay. And then do we have any members of the public that would like to pull an item for separate discussion?
We do not.
Okay. I will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the consent calendar minus item G.
I second that movement.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and I will call the roll. Councilmember Atkins Salazar.
Aye.
Councilmember Goldstein.
Aye.
Councilmember Schaefer.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Watson.
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Okay, motion passes, and so I will briefly turn this over to the Vice Mayor for this particular agenda item. So I'll be here, but I'll have my screen off. And
Thank you. I know that there's still a question with this ordinance over how to handle properties that might have multiple rentals on one property parcel. A couple examples. Well, I guess, one would be there's a primary residence that's being rented out as a short-term vacation rental, and then maybe a secondary unit on the property that's also being rented out as a vacation rental. And I don't think we've really evolved yet how we want to handle those. And so I just wanted to have that discussion with the council. And if staff has anything to add, please go ahead.
And David, feel free to chime in. I mean, I think there's appears to be sort of two sides of it. One is the number of units are counted. So if somebody rents a main house and they rent an accessory dwelling unit or a second unit, a mother-in-law unit that's detached from the house, They might rent them together and also rent them separately. So the question is, would that count as one or two? And then the question would be, if you're applying for a permit, are you paying a permit fee per individual unit? So on one side, you could have one permit and one parcel, one permit per parcel, you pay for one permit and everything on that counts as one towards the 100 cap. And on the other side, it would be every unit that you rent individually or part of a larger rental. But if you rent them individually, each of those units would count 100 cap, and you would pay for each of those potential units that you rent individually on that parcel. Now, a reminder, and maybe for people that are listening at home, if there is a long-term rent or occupy on the parcel, then other rental units on that parcel don't count towards the cap. So again, maybe one exclusively parcels that are in short stay rental situations, and then it's how many units do we count on an individual parcel if there's more than one unit. So, and then there's any combination there, do they only pay for one permit per parcel, every unit counts, or do they pay for every unit but it's only once, right? So any combination thereof, I think, would be the option. So I think if we had some direction of sort of what the council's preference was, then we'll make sure we build the application in such a way that we gather that data, and then we can do a total of numbers, because everybody gets a chance to, in essence, be grandfathered in if they get in the first 90-day period, and they can show that they've had accidental use on the property. We could bring back numbers to the council and see if you wanted to change that cap based on the way the numbers came in.
The only thing that I would add to the discussion is that, I think most cases that we have on the ground today would fall within those scenarios and would be managed by those scenarios. But there is a potential extreme scenario where someone has, say, an apartment complex with, 40 units, and they decided to come in and convert 40 units to vacation rentals. Obviously, we wouldn't that would be covered under this ordinance. And so I think there's some administrative work that we need to develop around that.
Thank you. Do we have any council members that have any comments?
Well, my initial leanings would be that we do count each unit separately. If the point is to guard housing stock, then I think that that's more consistent with that. I don't necessarily feel, though, that we should charge separately for each of those. So that's kind of where I'm leaning right now.
I completely. Oh, I was just going to say I completely agree with that. I think that the point of setting the cap is to set a cap, and so if there are, to not, let people find loopholes, and so if there are individual units, then that makes sense to count them individually, but I don't see a reason to charge property owners that own one parcel multiple times for their permit. So I agree with everything that Stacy's saying.
Councilmember Schaefer.
Yeah, I agree with both Councilmember Atkins-Salazar and Councilmember Goldstein. I do have a question, I guess. And so just thinking of ways where perhaps a property owner owns separate parcels, would they need to apply for separate business licenses for those separate parcels? Or would they have a business license, but each of those separate parcels would apply toward cap? Kind of, so thinking of all possible permutations of, how people would be affected by this, but.
Yeah, so from a business license perspective, they would apply for one city business license. I think, yes, they would apply for separate short stay rental permits for each parcel.
Okay, yeah, and then in that case, yeah, that's kind of the similar thinking as if we're protecting housing stock, and that is the point of this ordinance, especially a lot of people will be excluded from cap, especially for tenant occupied properties, et cetera. So if we're looking at these properties where, yes, there are 2, 3, whatever it might be, available apartments, units, houses, that's all contributing to taking away from housing. So I feel that it's definitely appropriate to at least per unit being rented out should count towards that cap. Yes.
Well, I agree with everyone's comments. And is that enough direction to staff?
Yeah, I don't think you need to make any specific change in the ordinance. I think you adopt it as is tonight, and we will outline it that way based on your direction in the from implementing documents. And then we'll bring back that data and we'll see that will significantly increase that come in this first round. Take it that way. So that would be your most conservative estimate. And then you can look at that cap at 100 and we'll see where we're at.
Great. And do we need to take public comment on this?
Yeah.
Have any member of the public that would like to comment?
If any members of the public would like to comment on this item, and we do not have any public comment.
All right. Do I have a motion?
I can make a motion. I move to adopt ordinance number 1543, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Arcata, creating Article 3 in Chapter 2, Title 6 of the Arcata Municipal Code to regulate short stay and vacation rentals, waive reading of the text, and consent to read by title only.
I second Councilmember Goldstein's motion.
All right, we have a second. We'll call the vote. Councilmember Gonzalez.
Aye.
Councilmember Schaefer.
Aye.
Councilmember Goldstein.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Motion carries. And we will now wait for the mayor. There we go.
Bam, voila, magic. Well, thank you. We are now on to new business. Item A, consider approval of the Arcata Ridge Trail Fickle Hill segment. We have a staff report from Community Development Director Loya.
Yeah, good evening, Mayor and Vice Mayor, council members. Before you tonight is the adoption of a negative declaration and approval of the project for the last segment that will connect Sunnybrae Forest to the Arcata Forest, the Ridge Trail project. And I have not only myself to present tonight, but Nature Cottrey, our city engineers here, our city manager, Deemer, has been in the project for a long time, and city attorney Nancy Diamond is also available for questions. So the recommendation is to receive a staff report, public comment, adopt the negative declaration as attachment A, and project with the preferred crossing. Just before I get into, I've got a staff to share with you, but before I get into those and start walking through the staff report in detail, I just wanted to point out that this project has a long history, like decades-long history, and that the staff report does go into some of the key items that came out of the public comment process, and I'll talk a little bit more about the process. But this history is because of the length. It's had different elements, different components. We've had lots of different stakeholders that have been involved in the project. And one of the things that I really want to point out is that we're talking about a 1,600 linear feet, about a third of a mile of trail that's going to be added to an existing 25-mile trail system. And so, this project is consistent with the general plan. It's consistent with the bike and ped master plan. It's consistent with our forest practices. Generally speaking, when you see trail projects, you see them on your consent calendar. It's an approval of a trail project and usually application for a grant to fund building that trail. And so this is a little unique. It seems like there's a lot more process with it, and there is. But overall, this project is to improve the existing environmental and safety conditions of the use of non-sanctioned trails in this area. And so that's really important to keep in mind as we walk through this. So let me just share with you my screen. We got some visuals to go along with the presentation at night. Okay, just to orient real quick, Fickle Hill is the long road going through the center here. On the north half, or on the top half of Since the Arcata Community Forest, the black lines with the numbers on them, those are existing trail systems. Down below, green, the bottom part of the screen is Sunnybrae Forest. And there's some existing trails in there. The trails with the dots represent the Ridge Trail. And so this gap between Sunnybrae and the Arcata Community Forest is what we're talking about here tonight. That's the approximate 1,600 linear feet. And it's in this, this part that we acquired recently, in part to conduct this project and this connection. So I just want to look at in a little more detail. We talked about what the project is, but it's largely on existing skid trails, and it's removing trails and/or skid trails, existing features that are contributing to runoff, sediment-laden runoff and that sort of thing. It's a historic logging site, and so it's some cleanup that we need to do on the property just to maintain it properly. And then all of these trails will be built according to accepted norms and standards for forest trails. What were the objectives that we're trying to accomplish here? Well, one, like I mentioned, connect the Sunnybrae to a community forest, but obviously providing a safe trail crossing across Fickle Hill is an important aspect of it. The initial study talks about dispersing recreational use, creating condone and focus trail, and demo and discourage non-sanctioned trails. And then finally, the project was really designed to avoid impacts to domestic water systems. And I'll share with you a little bit about how the project alternatives were developed in a minute. This was certainly a consideration. These are the primary objectives of the project. And so what was the process? As I mentioned, there's a lot of history associated with this. More recently, within the past few years, there were several neighborhood meetings where residents in the immediate vicinity were consulted. Prior to that, groups like the Coast Mountain Biking Association and others assisted with trail and fundraising to create the trails. So all of these different participants were involved in helping to craft what's before you in the staff recommendation. Through that process, there was design and redesign multiple times, and we effort to arrive at what we're proposing tonight, which we think is a superior, not only environmental alternative, but also the best design for the needs of most of the community. Now, I want to be clear, and you saw in your public doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is 100% happy what we arrived at, but this is a compromise that gets at the best of all possible design scenarios. We went through a more CEQA process, that's California Environmental Quality Act, as I described earlier. The project was originally approved using an exemption like most projects are. And subsequent to that exemption, there was some litigation filed, some agreements made through that litigation that we would dig into more detail around the environmental impact and some items associated with that litigation. But this more detailed declaration and initial study were the result of those agreements to conduct additional environmental work. And then that has led us up to, after a 30-day circulation period where the public can comment on the document and changes could be made to the project design, to the approval tonight. Next steps will be funding construction if it's approved. We'll get into a little bit more detail on that as the staff report goes forward. But let's focus in on this area a little more closely. We're zoomed in on that area. You recognize in the boundary that geometry. This is the upper part of the Sunnybrae Forest Tract. This purple line shows you, purple dashed line or brown, whatever color it you, shows you the current proposed alignment, which again follows mostly along skid trails existing, where we'd be improving skid trails and making them better for water quality. This location on the property, pushing it as far to the east as possible, again, was arrived at in an effort to ameliorate the concerns of neighbors about some existing water sources. And we'll get into that in a little more detail as well. Through I'm going to zoom in the trail crossing here, through the community conversation and also conversations with the county in developing the exact alignment of the crossing, 3 alternatives were ultimately developed. The original proposal was the blue trail alignment, which swings across and would enter at the city's existing maintenance access point here across Fickle Hill on the north side. So that would be a shot straight across there. Through the community engagement process, there were concerns raised about the domestic water supplies that are in this draw, in this catchment basin. And so a second alternative, this alternative option number 2, was developed. It was a weighted, safety site distances and those sorts of things, met with the county's requirements. But there were some other neighbors that were concerned about privacy issues and the need to potentially cut into the hill slope here and do some grading work. And so ultimately, through those conversations, both with the neighbors and the county, the city landed on this preferred crossing. Now, the preferred crossing has, some of the environmental benefits of being out of the catchment basin for the domestic water sources. It has adequate site distances we'll go into in a little bit here. And it's also a cost-effective trail alignment. And so for various reasons, including the fact that it's the preferred environmental alternative, staff is recommending that we approve this preferred crossing. Now, I'm going to go into some other alternatives that were raised through this public process in a little bit, but I want to be clear that this isn't everyone's preferred alternative. There are many in the community who feel like this blue option is the best in terms of traffic safety and in terms of providing for privacy of the existing neighbors. And we'll talk in a little bit more detail about that. This figure actually comes straight out of the initial study. And so this is part of what we use to analyze the environmental impacts, including to the water sources and traffic safety, which were some of the primary concerns that came up through our circulation period. Moving from this conceptual model, we used a couple of other features to assess traffic safety. One was, as is cited in the initial study, some line of sight estimates that were made in the city's original encroachment permit application that was done in May for this crossing here, the blue crossing. And so these lines of sight and various other safety factors were evaluated in that encroachment permit. But we went beyond that when we got to the level of doing the environmental analysis. And really, the full basis for the project safety will ultimately be whether or not the county issues an encroachment permit. Once we're done with our process, because this road is in the county, we're going to have to go and ask the county for an encroachment permit to install this crossing. They're going to be looking at their standards and design specifications and determine whether or not we have a project that meets with crossing safety and their guidelines for installing this crossing. But we didn't want to just approach this with a wing and a prayer. So we produced what I'll call tonight a 60% design. And that's what you're looking at here. This was the basis for making the determinations around the overall project and its ability to comport with those development standards for these types of crossings. I'm going to pause real quick here and see if Natra, our city engineer, wants to add anything to how this design was developed, whether you want to go into the surveying work that was done or anything else about the explanation.
No. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, staff, and the member of the public. What David had said earlier on the 3 alternatives, we have analyzed all 3 alternatives, and based on the analysis, we believe the picture that you see in front of you or the drawing you see in front of you is the best alternative based on the site visibility from the pedestrian perspective view and from the vehicle perspective view on the stopping site distance. And it has the least impact compared to other two alternatives for the neighboring properties. That's the reason this was chosen. And we've been working with county closely to ensure that they will buy on this design. So they've been consulted multiple times and they have provided some recommendation. So when we move forward with the encroachment permit application process, we will incorporate those recommendations and submit the plans to them.
Thanks, Netra. I did just want to point out a couple of design safety features that are incorporated in this project. First, there's going to be a high visibility ped crossing here. Backed off both on the downhill and uphill side, there'll be a yield sign and yield arrows indicating to drivers that they need to yield to pedestrians in the crosswalk. Backing off from that, minimum of 100 feet, there'll be advanced warning flashing beacons. So these will be flashing as drivers approach. And this was all designed with the current speed limit, which is 30 miles an hour in mind, to demonstrate in the initial study before we got started with the whole thing that the project would meet those design criteria. And right now, the county is considering reducing the speed limit in this area to 25. And so these sight distances, these warning flashing distances, the yield signs, all these safety features would be larger if implemented in this context than would be required at 25 miles an hour. Obviously, the crossing safety is something that's important to all community members as well as staff, and so this is a key design feature. I do want to point out a couple of other items here. I know this is sort of extracted out of nowhere. You're just looking at a blank sheet of paper, so it's hard to tell what we're looking at here. We surveyed in some of the features that are existing. So this is an existing driveway here of the neighbor to the west of the project. There's a split rail fence that leads up to the maintenance entry for the city. So this is not, to support parking or other, public use. This is to support the city's maintenance needs for the trail section at the top here. So occasionally we'll come in through this existing gate, park our trucks and do work out here. One of the new features associated with this project, though, is to install boulders to prevent people from parking here. Through the public comment, we received a lot of information about folks that are using this as a trailhead, bringing cars up here and dropping off bikes. And so I do just want to address that real quick and emphasize that this is not a trailhead. It's marked that it's not a trailhead. People should not be driving and parking up there. They should not be dropping off bikes. This is a trail access point, and it should not be used in any other way than for crossing and or accessing directly on a bike. We'll come back to this, but I wanted to zoom in on these features here just so you could see them a little bit better. Here's where the advanced flashing beacon will be. There's an existing bank, and then the crossing and the yield sign. So just to give you a sense for what that actually looks like, I took some of our aerial images and I looked at what does it look like uphill north of Fickle and downhill north of Fickle, and then also south of Fickle Hill. And that'll give you a sense for if you're waiting here to cross the road or waiting here to cross the road at the proposed location, what does the line of sight approximately look like? Now, I don't want the council to infer that this is how we made these decisions. These were measured in the field, recorded in the field, designed in the field based on actual survey work. But I do want you to have a sense for it. So, as you read through the comments, the public comments, that you understand what the, what the actual potential site distances are. So starting with the uphill entry to a potential crossing, starting on the north side, looking uphill, this line is approximately 200 feet. There's a clear line of sight for that 200-foot distance. Similarly, on the uphill, looking uphill on the south side of Fickle Hill, so if you're at that crosswalk, looking uphill for cars coming, there's clear 200-foot line of sight distance. On the downhill side, if you were on the north side of Fickle Hill waiting at that crosswalk, you could see 200 feet to the opposing lane of traffic pretty clearly. But if you were on the south side, there's some vegetation right here in the way. And so the project design accommodates removal of these trees. We evaluated that in the initial study, but as part of the project design to ensure that there's clear line of sight between the south side of Fickle Hill crossing and safe line of sight distance. Let me just give you another look at what that looks like. This is about 200 feet south of where Nature is standing here at the north side Fickle Hill crossing. So if he was getting ready to be in the crosswalk and I was driving my car from 200 feet away, I could see him based on the way the conditions are now. But I could not see him if he was on the south side, and that's the clump of trees that we're looking at removing to ensure that there's a site. Again, I want to emphasize that this is going to ultimately be part of an encroachment permit application to the county. They are going to verify with their engineering department that we've met all those safety standards that are based in highway and road crossing design. Nature, can you just touch base real quick on this concept of line of sight, because it came up so frequently in the public comment? Can you talk about what a line of sight study is and how these crossings are designed so that the council has that context?
Yes, definitely. Thank you. But before I go into that, what I would say, like you saw the 200 feet number on prior maps that David was showing. That 200 number is not a magic number. 200 number is the distance that if the vehicle is going at a speed of 30 miles per hour, it needs that much distance to stop from 30 to 0. That's the reason that number has been used, 200 feet. And on downhill and uphill, those numbers changes. But as David mentioned, county is working to reduce the speed limit in that area from 30 miles per hour to 25. So that distance will become 155 feet once the posted speed limit is 25 miles per hour. So line of sight is, the term is used differently by different engineers. It's just to ensure that when a person is standing at crosswalk, they have a proper sight distance before crossing. And it's the same thing for the person on a vehicle looking at the crosswalk, or when they have to make a quick stop or reaction to an object on the street or a crosswalk. So that's the sight visibility and stopping sight distance. So there's not a special technical study that's been done, like a line of sight study, but as an engineer, we ensure that there is a proper sight visibility for people crossing on any intersection or the crossing. So that's the term has been used. So it's not like we do a additional study. All the numbers for the distance, like as I mentioned, 200 feet, it's already a standard number that has been done based on the AASHTO, or we call it the Green Book. There are already, for different speed limits, there are different distances. We use those guidelines to design any traffic control devices that we install or propose on the city streets or on the county streets. So if you have any further question on that, I can expand on that more. And as David mentioned, we do have to remove some of the trees to make the site visibility better on the east side. And also on the west side, there is a bank that we might have to shave a bit to improve the site visibility also. But they are the part of the project, or the part of the proposed project for the preferred alternative.
Thanks, Nitra. And I do want to transition now to the water quality impacts, because that was another topic of major concern that came in the public comment. But before I leave that, I wanted to acknowledge that, Fickle Hill is a long downhill grade, and people don't ride their brakes. They oftentimes do drive at, higher speed limits than what's posted. But I met out there with some of the neighbors a couple of Fridays ago to talk through some of their concerns. And what I witnessed of the 30 or 40 cars that passed by us, most of them were going way too fast coming down the hill initially, and then they saw that people were near the road and they slowed down. And so I know that's anecdotal, but I just wanted to point out that you you can't look out your window and say, well, people drive too fast on this road, therefore it's going to be an unsafe crossing, with all these mitigating factors that we're putting in, the flashing beacons, the yield signs, the crossing signs, the high vis crossing, and the knowledge that people are going to be out there. This is going to meet with those safety design standards, and I think the majority of people are going to respect that. Okay, so transitioning here to the water quality impacts. This is a map that was included in the Pacific Watersheds Associates report that was done for the initial study. I'm going to zoom in on portions of this, but just to orient you again, here's the green outline of that upper Sunnybury tract, the purple outline of the proposed new alignment trail that follows mostly skid trails. And then we have embedded on this the creeks that cross the property, as well as some existing and abandoned surface water features. And the reason this map is gray is because it's using LiDAR data, and it's creating a surface model based on LiDAR data. And then it also shows the contours. These lines show the contours, the elevation contours. And so this is helpful in understanding what the water quality impacts would be, because a contour line down, or you follow the water basins, you can see where the watershed impacts would occur. Again, I mentioned earlier the alignment was moved to this side of the property based on some concerns about the domestic water sources in this basin. And so the trail was moved into an entire other basin. This alignment is in a basin that doesn't affect these sources. If there were sediment transported off these trails, it would get into this creek system and drop below the domestic water surface diversions. So what about the crossings themselves? Well, the original proposed crossing, which is this option number 3, is approximately 75 feet from the stream initiation point. And I know in the public record you read that there was some concern about this mapping, but we've verified it from multiple different sources that this is in fact a location. But it is 75 feet. Our PWA report, or Pacific Watersheds Associates report, recommended a 100-foot setback from this initiation point. And so option number 3 is within that 100-foot setback, 75 feet away, which is part of the reason why we moved to considering other crossings. Preferred crossing and the option 2 crossing don't have any impact on this watershed at all, on this basin at all. And so there's no direct impact from option 2 or the preferred crossing on this basin. And that's what the initial study says, that's what the PWA report says, and we followed those recommendations. I also wanted to point out here that the PWA report showed the setback here of approximately 200 feet. They recommended a 100-foot minimum setback in the final report. You may hear some public comment tonight about a draft report that was released unintentionally from PWA. On that draft report, there were different recommendations and are in the final report. The final report is the basis of the initial study and the basis of the staff recommendation and the evaluation of the project overall. So we received a lot of community input on this project. You received a packet, attachment B in your packet, which had more than 120, I think, unique commenters commenting on the project. The overwhelming majority of those comments were pro for the project, were supportive of the project. Many of them pointed out issues around traffic safety and the crossing safety and watershed impacts. And so we feel like we've pointed back to those issues and responded to that. But the comments come in a lot of different flavors. When we're looking at a CEQA analysis and comments come in, if comments come in and they address an environmental impact, then we have to respond by assessing whether or not the comment has raised a new concern around the environmental impacts that wasn't evaluated, or if we can point them to something that was already discussed in the initial study, then we do that. There's another type of comment. Most of the comments that we received are this type, that are just basic, approval or, support or opposition to the project. And that was the vast majority of the comments that we got were for approval, and those don't require a CEQA response. And you'll see in the master responses that most of the responses are of that type. And then there were several comments that came in that reflected, what I will call neighborhood impacts, not environmental impacts. These are things that, people perceive the change of this project is going to affect them as neighbors to this project. And those are valid concerns oftentimes, and they don't have a place in CEQA though. And so the fact that someone feels like maybe their privacy is infringed upon, that's not an environmental impact that CEQA addresses, but it is a neighborhood impact that the council can, consider ameliorating through additional project alternatives. And so from the community input that we received, we drew up these couple of bullet points for the council to consider adding into the project. One, the domestic water source users were concerned that there might not be only direct impacts, but maybe indirect impacts. Just having people going on a trail, they might see, the water infrastructure and decide to go take a look and see what it is. And so, potentially we could enclose those domestic water inlets with enclosure fencing that'll keep people out. Additional signage. To make sure that people stay on the sanctioned trails. And this is real typical for, the Arcata community forest. You'll have people go and build little mountain bike trails or little walking trails they want to use that aren't sanctioned trails. And we go through and we cover those back up. If we need to, we sign them to say, please stay on the trail. And we manage the forest in that way. And so those could be added in this situation as well. And those would be modified on an ongoing management basis. Some folks were concerned about privacy, their privacy being impacted. And so there are some strategic vegetation screening that we can consider doing, planting native vegetation in the forest to make sure that, the relative privacy of these properties is maintained. I want to acknowledge that, these trails are already in existing use and people, walk by these properties, but I think it's a reasonable amendment to the project. And then in addition, we can do additional work, signage, messaging around discouraging the use as a trailhead. Recently, the Robo Coast Mountain Bike Association published in its newsletter a piece discouraging people from using it as a trailhead. And so we can continue that messaging and try and get people to really understand that the best way to build support for these kinds of trails is to, adhere to the rules. And then finally, depending on, the needs and the cost, we could consider doing some wildlife-friendly fencing at strategic locations along the western border if that seems like the appropriate thing. These kinds of changes to the project, they don't have an environmental impact, and so they don't really change the effect that the environmental document arrived at. And in this case, we've determined that there's no environmental impact, and we're asking you, or a less than significant environmental impact, I should say. And so we're asking you to adopt a negative declaration affirming that. We would like the flexibility to continue to work towards addressing these neighborhood impacts, to the extent that we can as we move forward and secure the funding for the project and actually go towards construction. Now, I do want to point out that you received in your packet the public comment that had been received as of the date the staff report was written. And the public comment period on this project ran through yesterday. And so we addressed all of the comments that came in between when the packet was prepared and yesterday, and provided those as an update to you in your blue folder items. And those should have been received as attachment B2. In B2, we took the master response comments that we had included in the packet and updated them based on the new public comment that we received. And as you can see, we followed through on the same sort of coding, where in the margin of the comment that we received, we placed a number that represented the master comment response at the front of that content. And so together, attachment B and attachment B2 that you received today reflect the public comment that was collected through the comment period and those responses. And staff's analysis is that no new issues had been raised that weren't previously addressed in the initial study, and we continue to recommend that you adopt a negative declaration. Lastly, I'll say about public comment is that you did receive a couple of additional public comments in your blue folder items today, and just for those public members that submitted comments today, to let them know that the council did see them. Okay, so just to recap, we're suggesting you adopt the neg deck and approve the project with the purple alignment and the preferred crossing, and those additional amenities as necessary to get the project done. Through the circulation period, there was one other concept that came up, was instead of extending the trail from Sunnyberry Forest up to the Arcata Community Forest as was proposed, that we should consider a different location entirely. That the trail system, you can see this black line, the trail system runs up to the end of the Sunnyberry Forest tract, north end here. And one commenter suggested that we actually extend a trail to exit at this point here. We didn't formally take this up in the environmental analysis. If the council wants us to pursue that, we would have to reset the clock and go back and do more environmental analysis. But I do want to point out, as we addressed in the responses to comments, that the city doesn't have site control, easement access, even though it looks like it touches the road here, Fickle Hill Road. We don't have site control to gain access to Fickle Hill from here. We'd have to garner that. This section right here obviously is geographically constrained. We're talking about coming and using this entire section here to approach the road. And this is at approximately 30% slope in this area. This area has a 70% slope approximately, and you have much less area to get your switchbacks in. And then the biggest issue with using this as an alternative trail connection for this purpose is that there's no direct connection to the Arcata Community Forest. I can see that, you know, we could potentially go up Boynton Prairie Road and make a connection through one of these parcels. We don't have site access there. You could get onto Fickle Hill and then ride the or walk the approximate 1,500 feet to access the Arcata Community Forest. So this location, while it is a feasible future point of access into the Sunnyberry Forest, it doesn't accomplish the project goals, and we don't currently have site access for it. And so, I told the commenter that I would address this, and they put it into the public comment, and that's how we've addressed it. So I can pull the slideshow back up if anybody has specific questions about any of those slides, or any of the content in general. But I'll just turn it back over to the council and ask if there are any questions, and encourage you to take public comment on the project.
Great, thank you. Let's start with Councilmember Schaefer. Any questions?
No question necessarily. I just did want to say that I have talked to quite a few neighbors in the area as well, and a lot of people in both Sunnyberry and Fickle Hill that are in very strong support of this trail connection. I would definitely like to see, hopefully, some sort of vegetation barrier or fence-like barrier to the water system. I think that would hopefully address a lot of the concerns, though it has been shown that there's not going to be any environmental impacts, but you have people who make choices, who want to go mess with things and cross boundaries that they're not supposed to, and build trails that aren't there. And so I think that definitely having indication of some sort of fence or vegetation barrier that blocks that off, and then also proper signage to obviously, this is the community forest boundary. You are entering private property. You are trespassing. To make that clear, obviously, to the public is important. And I know that city staff has definitely already considered that. And I do want to voice my concern and support, I guess, for there being some sort of barrier around that domestic water source. But besides that, no further questions or comments now.
Great. Councilmember Goldstein.
I don't think I have any questions. Thank you so much for the thorough presentation and report. I know that I've also heard just a lot of excitement and support of this project, and it seems like there's some pretty easy steps we could take to find a common ground, I guess. And so, yeah, I've just heard a lot of really good things, and people are excited.
Councilmember Atkins Salazar.
No questions, but thank you to staff for all of the time spent addressing the concerns that have been brought up. So thank you.
Vice Mayor Watson.
No questions. Thank you.
Okay, and I don't have anything to add. So let's see, are there any members of the public that wish to comment on this item?
Yes, and before we do that, just a reminder, if you're logged into the Zoom, click on raise your hand on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you have called in via phone, press *9 on your phone to raise your hand. When it is your turn to speak, the clerk will unmute you and invite you to speak. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to speak. And in line right now, it looks like we have at least 4 speakers. And our first one is Melissa. Can you go ahead, Melissa?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Hi there. I am a neighbor that lives within 3/10 of a mile of this trail crossing. I get all of the neighbor documents when the city is seeking input about this. And I just want to say that the city has done such an amazing job of reaching out to neighbors and surveying us and inviting us to meetings. And I didn't speak at the planning commission meeting, but there were many people who commented that said that felt like the city wasn't addressing their concerns. So I just want to say I'm a neighbor who I feel like the city has really been incredibly responsive. So thank you so much. And David's presentation just now was so exhaustive that now I feel like the council can see how responsive the city has truly been. My most important point is that I live right where that last little point, Boynton Prairie Road potential output connector would be, which doesn't really make sense since there's private property all the way to the Ridge Trail connector on the north side. But what I do here is literally that is my backyard. So I just want to say YIMBY, yes, in my backyard. And what I hear from my backyard is people coming up through the Sunnybrae Forest and then traveling along Fickle Hill Road where there is no shoulder and there is very strange dappled light. It is very hard to see people riding their bike along the shoulder, walking their dogs, and walking to connect that 1/3 of a mile to get from the Sunnybrae Forest along Fickle Hill Road and go in to the north side. So please do not delay in approving this project, which has been years in the making, so that they're not going to stop using the trails. They are going to continue using the trails, and instead they're going to walk the road to make that connection happen. So if council tonight could do not delay in approving.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next is Steve. Can you go ahead, Steve?
Yes, my name is Stephen Perrault. I'm a board member of the Redwood Coast Mountain Bike Association. And I volunteer at Trail Days with the city many times and feel that the city is very diligent when determining the most appropriate trail alignment. Between their experience and the thorough environmental review, I'm confident that the trail connector and road crossing is best case scenario for the project in terms of the impact of the project area and the nearby water sources. There are obvious safety and access concerns that this connector will finally resolve, which is a great thing and long overdue. There's been much public comment thus far. The due diligence has been paid by the city as demonstrated by David's excellent summary. And this community is ready for the Ridge Trail. And I support the city council to adopt the initial study and to swiftly approve the Ridge Trail connector. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Next, we have a phone caller. Please go ahead.
Good evening, City Council. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, yeah, this is Uri Driscoll. I don't really want to spend a lot of time on the past. That's all been very well documented. Just for those of you who don't know, that there currently is a court-ordered injunction in place for this project, which also involved a court order for an independent environmental review to fulfill the CEQA requirements. On November 17th, Pacific Watershed Associates did produce a memorandum of understanding, or a memorandum rather, to inform stakeholders and agencies of potential impacts of the proposal. That report included recommendations to conduct a line of sight safety study, as well as providing a 150-foot setback for the waterway. Now, 5 days later, November 22nd, PWA came out with another report that somehow eliminated the line of sight requirements and changed 150-foot protections to 150 feet or 100 feet. And there were other edits as well, as very well outlined in Mr. Jones's written testimony. Then we have an email chain between city staff that stating that Mr. Andre, who was lead on this project, was not happy with the initial report, presumably the November 17th, as it pertains to the lawsuit, and would provide edits. So let's fast forward. The next upcoming court hearing. This is still under litigation. The judge is going to ask, well, how's it going? They're going to look at these documents and ask themselves, well, which one of the PWA reports are actually independent? So I encourage you, before you make any decision tonight, put yourself in the judge's shoes, because that's what's really going to matter. It's not whether 1,000 people want this trail or not. Meanwhile, we have an alternative and superior trail access location to the Sunny Gray Forest. Developing that location further, its under current use, would avoid the legal and logistical roadblocks.
Thank you.
And we would be able
Thank
to
you for your
finally
comments.
address the safety
Your time is
issues.
up. Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you.
Next, we have Mike. Please go ahead, Mike.
Hello, hey there, this is Supervisor Mike Wilson. I just wanted to thank everybody really for all the effort that's gone into this. This project really, or this section is really the apex, quite literally, of a trail system that has been in, planning and building for decades now. And so I'm just so thankful for everyone's continued collaboration. I really want to thank the neighborhood for their efforts and understanding, and really putting in the time to really work on that project and make it better, and really in understanding the connection that this project has between communities. I mean, it really literally connects communities together. And so I'm very thankful that we're moving forward. And I want to just make sure that that there is understanding that this project will be reviewed by county staff and independently with relationship to the crossings and the access, and we'll see how that works out. I don't want to predicating thing that I will not be involved in that, but I want to make sure that we are all collaborative, and I'm just been appreciative of the collaboration between the county and the staff and all our citizens, and just thank you so much for all your efforts.
Thank you. We have 3 waiting. The next is Allison. Please go ahead, Allison.
Hi, my name's Allison O'Dowd. I'm a professor at Humboldt State University, and I live in the Sunny Brae neighborhood. I'm a river ecologist and also use the trails in the Sunny Brae and Arcata Community Forests regularly with my family. And I just want to express my support for this connector trail. I'm glad to see it's going to really reduce erosion from some of these other trails that are currently being used, and that it's not drastically affecting water supply. So I really feel like it's a win-win for recreation in the area and connecting the Ridge Trail. So I just wanted to express my support as a local.
Thank you. Next, we have Russell. Go ahead, Russell.
Can you unmute us? Yep, we can hear you. Great.
I've lived on Fickle Hill 40 years. The water supply system I've worked on many times. The goal, it seems, for the city is to get a safe passage, and the safe passage is necessary for them to first get access points. There has never been an access point for a trail on Fickle Hill to this day. And for years, the city has tried to do this and has never been accomplished. Fickle Hill Road has a right-of-way on each side of the asphalt that the county owns. And in order to do that, they have to have an encroachment permit on each side of the road because they're trying to get 2 access points. And for years they've tried and they've been unsuccessful. I'd like to direct your attention to an access point that may solve the problem that's been going on for possibly 10 years or more. An access point further down the hill that at present time is an illegal access. Why, you may ask, would this be better? It's in a better location. It has greater visibility for traffic. The road is level. It's not a 4.5-degree slope. It has greater line of sight distance. It has a flat road. The estimated sign of distance would not be a problem like it is at the present site that they are considering. It does not have an icy sign beside it. It has greater stopping distance availability. It would be much easier to patrol. It's closer to the city of Arcata boundary. And the 2 big issues that it does not have is there's no domestic water supply in the way, and it's safer because the road is flat. The present road has a 4.5-degree slope, and although you heard from the city engineer, every bit of data that they used was for flat. It's not 200 feet, it's 240 feet. And if it's on the slope that it is, it's about.
Thank you, Russell.
Okay, and just a reminder, if there is anybody, we have one more in line. If there is anyone, oh, we got a couple more. So a reminder, if you do want to speak on this item, to use the raise your hand function. Our next speaker is a phone caller with the number ending in 2526. Please go ahead. There you go.
Okay,
Yes, please go ahead.
thank you. My name is Michael Proul. I'm representing the Humboldt Trails Council. And first, I'd like to commend David Loya for a very detailed and clear explanation addressing the concerns about pedestrian safety after crossing and the impacts on water supply and water quality near the crossing. We at Humboldt Trails Council support the Arcata Ridge Trail and specifically this crossing project at Fickle Hill Road. Since the initial study found no negative environmental impacts, we encourage you, the city council members, to accept and certify the initial study and the negative declaration, which was presented to the Arcata Planning Commission last week, and approve this project and move ahead on this trail segment that will finally link the Sunnybrae Forest to the Arcata Community Forest. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have a screen name AP. Can you please go ahead?
Yeah, my name's Abigail. I'm a resident in the area. And I did leave a written comment, but I'd just like to emphasize that we'd really prefer for option 3 to be the crossing. That way, vegetation that creates a noise barrier and privacy isn't needed to be removed. We're then able to safely pull out of our driveway before we have to stop for people crossing. And we find it, I find it to be the safest option for the residents at where I am. I share a driveway with several people, and there's another driveway right next to us. And yeah, option 3 is the best. And there's no encroachment on private property. You don't have to use a right-of-way or anything. You won't have to cut into the embankment. And you won't have to send pedestrian traffic up Fickle Hill on a shoulder that doesn't exist. So in order to make the crossing at either the preferred option or option 2, there needs to be a shoulder created, which means cutting into the embankment and the property of a resident, and removing vegetation that provides privacy and noise barrier. So in using option 3, none of that needs to be done, and there's no actual dwelling or privacy concern associated with option 3. It also is at a safer point. The road is the visibility is better at option 3, and we're able to safely pull out of our driveway before considering the pedestrians, which is, I mean, there's so many times where I've been almost rear-ended pulling out of my driveway because there's a complete blind to the left of us, and so we use a mirror. So yeah, just and because there has been no negative impact.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we currently have one more waiting. Reese, can you go ahead, please?
Yes, thank you. I'm the longtime coordinator of the Volunteer Trail Steward program in both the Sunny Brae and the community forest. My message is very simple. It's hard to appreciate just how long the Ridge Trail has been in the making, years and years. So I implore the council to not delay this process. Please, it's time to approve it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Checking one last time for any further public comment on this item. No further public comment, Mayor.
Okay. Let's see. So are there any final comments or motion from the council? And I'll start with Councilmember Schaefer.
Yeah, just one comment on the Boynton Prairie crossing. I don't know how many of my fellow council members are familiar with that area, but I am very familiar with this proposed second trail crossing. And the land that it's on, as we saw on the map, it doesn't even directly necessarily meet up with Fickle Hill Road, and it is a very steep, very muddy, currently illegal trail that a lot of people use. I also have worry that if that was the choice of trail used for a crossing, I think more people would even be inclined to use that as a trailhead due to the pull-off areas at the bottom of Boynton Prairie Road, where there's a lot of illegal parking currently taking place as well. And that, as Ms. Hardy said in her comment as well, that it makes people, be walking a third of a mile basically up Fickle Hill Road. And it's not the safest road with no shoulder to be walking on. And I think reducing the amount of space that people would have to walk on Fickle Hill Road is the preferred method. And that's why I think many of us, and from the public comment that we've heard, are in support of that crossing. That's more eastern on Fickle Hill Road. So that's my one comment on that. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Goldstein.
No more questions. Thanks.
Okay. Councilmember Atkins-Salazar, and also please know if anyone wants to make a motion, we'll entertain that as well.
I will move to adopt a negative declaration and approve the Fickle Hill segment project.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I will call the vote by roll call. Councilmember Schaefer.
Aye.
Councilmember Goldstein.
Aye.
Councilmember Atkins-Salazar.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Watson.
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Motion passes. Thank you. Thank you for the public participating in this meeting and throughout the entire process. And thank you also to our staff for all their work on this. And yes, it's been a long road. Okay, next we will move to oral and written communications. This time is provided for people to address the council on matters not on tonight's agenda. Please raise your hand if you are on the Zoom webinar, or press *9 if you are on a phone line and you would like to make a public comment. Speakers are limited to 2 minutes. When it is your time for public comment, the clerk will unmute you and invite you to speak. Do we have any members of the public that would like to comment?
Giving a moment to check for public comment, and it looks like we do not have any public comment.
Okay, with that, we will move on to council and staff reports. Are there any staff updates?
There are no staff updates this evening.
Okay, Vice Mayor Watson.
Nothing to report this evening. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Atkins Salazar.
Nothing to report today, thank you.
Councilmember Goldstein.
Nothing to report, thanks.
Councilmember Schaefer.
Nothing to report, thanks.
Okay, and the only thing I just wanted to note, Humboldt Waste Management Authority's Executive Director, Jill Duffy, will be retiring. And so the recruitment period, the open application period, I think just ended in this past week. And so the recruitment process will be continuing over the next few months, but I'll make sure to update once we have a candidate. But that's a pretty big deal for this organization, this transition. So thanks, everyone. And then for dates of future meetings, Karen, can I turn this over to you about goal setting?
Sure, and we could send out another doodle poll. Kayla did send out one and tried to come up with a couple of nights for goal setting. I'm just going to pull up an email that she sent me right at the end of the day here on goal setting. And we didn't land on a great date yet. So she has a few other options for us. And I don't know if people have their calendars tonight, but a couple of dates that might work would be Wednesday, March 10th. I'm trying to think of times, or Tuesday, March 16th. We do have other city meetings, but none that the council would have conflicts with. Or Thursday, March 25th is RCEA, which is at 3:30. So that can be kind of a long day. So I think I just wanted to check on March 10th and March 18th, if either of those would work for the council. Or Thursday, April 1st. It gets a little bit later, but if we want to go out that far. So Wednesday, March 10th, Thursday, March 18th, and Thursday, April 1st, if any of those would work for the council.
This is at 6 p.m. all those days?
Yeah, and we could talk other times, but that seems to work for the majority of the council. 5:30, 6.
Are there any of those dates that do not work for a council member? So the 10th.
I would prefer not the 18th, just because I have a work training that goes up until 6. That would just be a very long day. But if that's the day that works till everybody, I'm fine with it. But I would prefer the 10th.
Okay, we need to pick 2 dates. That's correct. So the 10th. So 10th seems to work for folks. No, I just wanted to clarify. Do we need to pick 2 dates?
We do, because the 4th is the chamber event. Yeah, I mean, if we can, it would preferably, Councilmember Atkins Salazar has said she could try to find a sub for one Monday night if we had to, but if we can avoid that, I think, that is the one night that she's booked. So, what about the 1st? Would that be pushing it too far out if we did the 10th and the 1st? It gives quite a gap between them, but it would also give staff time to sort of refine and council to think about things a little bit more too.
How does that sound for folks?
I know it's a pretty big gap. I guess that's what comes to mind. It's like 20 days. I guess if it was beneficial to staff.
I was the only one to kind of object to the 18th, so I'm fine with that. And also I'm fine with the 25th. I mean, RCEA, either of those days will be a long day for me, so I'm fine with either, whatever works best for everybody. So.
Do you have a preference between the 18th or the 25th, Sarah?
If we want to give staff more time is kind of what it sounds like to refine it. I think the 25th might be better. I don't know what's best for staff. So.
That work for everybody else if we did the 10th and the 25th?
That sounds good.
Sure.
Yeah, I feel bad if Sarah has to go all the way to 6 and then do another meeting. I know that's a lot.
The 25th actually would be better though, because we have council on the 17th. So then that would be like 2 back-to-back long meeting days. So actually the 25th probably would be better.
Okay.
So.
All right. Okay, now to confirm the 10th and the 25th. Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Usually it's not really fruitful to do schedule coordinating via a live meeting, but that worked out really well. So thank you. I think with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, guys.